Hi there once again and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial. And in this one we're going to be looking at building one of these, which is of course a radial piston setup for an aircraft engine. In order to achieve this we're going to be using Expresso at every move, and of course we're going to be needing to group our objects in a very specific way. That's what we're about in this tutorial, so without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. I'm going to look at the techniques for building this from scratch, so I'll start with a rectangle. In the width I'll make it 30 and in the height 40. Hit over object just to get a little bit closer, just so that we can see what we've got on the screen there. And now we need to make this editable, but before I do I'll command drag to copy and I'll place my second rectangle in a null and name this Originals, in case we make any mistakes. Just close that down and hide that. Okay, super. Now we've got the rectangle, so let's make it editable. Hit C and we can select all of our points and hold down our control key, bring up the menu and select subdivide. We'll just do it once for now, and then we can think about dragging some points just to form the basic shape for our crank. I'll just go back to live selection for this, just select these two, and let's just get a different view so that we can see what we're doing, and we'll use the scale tool here and just drag these two in, and we will also select, in fact what I'll do, if I just get the selection tool, just move them up a little bit from there, select these top two, drag these down so that we get that kind of shape. And then what we need to do next is Command A to select all, and then in our spline menu here come down to tangents and soft interpolate. And we've got a basic shape. It's not perfect at the moment, but we need to do some more work. So for a start we need to get a hold of these two and just bring them down so that we get a better curve in there. And then we can also bring these two up slightly, and that's looking good. And then from here we can do some work with the actual tangents and then do a little bit of shifting around. So if we just bend these in so that they're slightly over that way, and then pull them in to around here somewhere, and we'll do the same with our tangent over here, just rotate that around slightly. I mean, we don't have to be absolutely pedantic about this, but you know, we want to get a shape that's slightly better than we had. And I think, you know, something like that will actually do quite nicely for the basic shape of our crank. That's looking quite good. And then from here we can think about adding a couple of circles, and we'll do that next. Actually, one thing I will do, I'll just select this. What I'm going to do is just draw these up to about, say, there. And I think that is actually the better shape for our crank. That will be quite nice, I think. Let's have a look, see if we can also we can just draw those in very slightly. Yeah, something like that. I'll go with that. I think that's the shape I'd like. That's a final shape. So let's add a circle. Way too big at the moment. It just needs to be 3 centimeters. So that's our center circle. That's fine. That's the one that this thing is going to rotate around. That will be the axis that the crank rotates around. And then we'll command drag to copy. We'll then command drag both of these to copy and drop the second two into the originals so that we've got them there. And then these two we'll bring over here, and the second one we can move down to about here. We don't have to be too particular about this. Near enough is good enough. Let's just go into the coordinates for it. If we select our circle coordinates, see where we are. If we make that minus 12.5, I think we'll be fine for that. That's okay. So they're in the correct plane and they're ready to go. The next thing we can do, select both of them, make them editable, and now we can select all come down to connect objects and delete, and we're there. And we've now got our rectangle that's going to make up, or our shape. Of course, it isn't a rectangle anymore, but it doesn't matter about changing the name. So we've got our basic template for making our crank. We can now hold down the Option key and select and extrude. The offset needs to be 4 centimeters, and that's as much as we need to change in there. And the caps, we can have a size of 0.2, and we can leave the segments as 3. What I'll also do is change my display to garage shading. And we're in isopalms, which is fine, and we can see that we've got a nice shape, and it's all looking very, very good. The next thing I'm going to do is bring in a cylinder. And this will be the center cylinder, so what I'm going to do is arrange this in the correct way. I'm just going to hit H so that I can see where I am. We need to arrange this plus Z. That will be fine for that. The radius needs to be 3 so that it fits through the center of our crank there. The height 12. One height segment, and I'll put 60 rotation segments to give us a nice round object. I'll just hit O again and zoom out a little bit. And the caps, we'll say fillet, and we'll say 3 segments but only 0.2 in our radius, and that looks really nice. Yeah, that's fine. And we can just bring this forward, just bring it forward to sort of somewhere around level with the edge there. That should be fine. Yeah, so that's all looking good. The next thing to do really is to just command drag and bring this one down into here. So again, if we go into the coordinates and make this minus 12.5, it will line up, and then we can think about moving this one backwards to here. And again, we'll get it so that it just roughly lines up somewhere around there, and that should look great. Okay, that's fine. My 2 cylinders here, I'm not going to bother putting in the originals because they're not going to be altered, so I don't really need to. So there's no way that I can make any kind of mistake with those. The first cylinder here, what I need to do is get a null and drop this null just above the cylinder here, and I'm going to call this null crank. Drop the cylinder into it, drop the extrude with the spline in it, also within the crank null, and this second cylinder here I'm going to drop underneath the spline within the extrude. The final thing that I need to do is get another null, I'll name it target, drop it under the cylinder, and then I also need to put it to the correct shape, to the correct place. What I actually need to do, thinking about it, is probably drop it into the cylinder itself and zero this out here so that it's within the cylinder. If we change our view to the right hand view and hit H, we can see where we are, and we can see that we've got the target here, so it's correct, it's in the correct point. And if we change the view again to our front view and we hit H, we can see that it's dead center, and that's exactly where it needs to be. The only thing we need to do is go into our right hand view again, and with this target we can just, for now, we'll just eyeball this, and it needs to be placed somewhere around there. We can make adjustments to this later, but somewhere around there will do fine for now. Okay, so that's our crank nicely set up. Everything is where it needs to be, and if we turn the crank, we'll find that everything will move as it should, as we'd expect it to. So that's absolutely fine. Moving on from here, we need to make a spider bearing. The way we're going to do that is first of all create 4 circles. So I'll create one, command drag to create the others. Oops, don't want to put that in there, just command drag, command drag. So I've got my 4 circles. Obviously they're far too big at the moment and we need to change the size of them. But first we're going to start naming them. So I'll call this one center, this one guide. Don't worry about the names at the moment, you'll see why in a minute. Outer, and finally piston. And then we can start thinking about their sizes. The center will make 3 centimeters in radius, the guide 15, the outer 20, and the piston 2. And that's fine. That's our circles ready to go. We'll move them. We'll just get them over here. Just move them out of the way for the moment so that we can see them and we can see what we're going to be doing with them. Now, our center and our outer and guide, all fine, that they're fine. They don't need to really move. They're exactly where they need to be. But our piston circle here, what we actually need is 7 of these, and they need to be arranged around the guide. So that's what we've got to do next. We've got to duplicate these around the guide, and that's where we're going next. We have our piston selected, so we can come up to our tools menu, select duplicate here. We don't want 8 copies, we simply want 6. We do want copies though, so we'll leave the mode as it is, or rather the clone mode as it is. The mode here, we'll say a long spline, select our guide, just drag that into there, and then all we need to do is hit apply, and we get what we want. We've got piston copies here, and we can also drop our piston in there to give us 7 copies. We can just call these piston splines. That's fine. What I'll also do now is select all of these, and again I'm going to copy them and drop them into the originals. Just close that up so that we are safe. What we need to do next, we don't need to worry about our guide so much. That's not important anymore, so we can just erase that. And we've got all of our circles now to make a spider bearing with, so we've got the template there. All we need to do is really drag these into here and then make these editable. Hit C, and then once again connect objects and delete, and then we can drop this out of here and remove that piston spline's null because we don't need it anymore. So just select that and delete. Okay, so we're ready here. It just says center again. We don't need to worry too much about the actual naming of the spline. That's fine. Once again, with our center selected, we can hold down the option key and select extrude. The offset wants to be just 2 centimeters, and in the caps, once again, in our size for our rounding, 0.2, and we can leave the segments at 3. And there you have it. We've created our spider bearing, and it looks great. Actually, I've realised I've made a slight error. I shouldn't have actually thrown the guide spline away because we'd need it still. So I'm just going to bring one out of there and then command drag to copy another one into there. That's fine. So we've still got the original in case I do anything with that one again and decide that I need it. So what we want to do now is actually place some cylinders along within the cutouts here around the bearing. That's what we need to do next. So let's bring in a cylinder. Again, we'll make this plus Z, and it wants to be 2 in the radius, 10 in the height, 1 in the height segments, and 60 in the rotation segments. The caps, once again, will say fillet and 0.2, and that should be great. So moving on from here, again, we need to come into our tools, duplicate, and it should already be set up for us. So we should just simply need to say apply. And we can say apply as soon as I drag the guide spline in there and hit apply. And that's great, there it is. So our cylinders are now set up pretty much the way we want them. The only thing we need to do, we can just drag this cylinder into here, and then we'll simply move them forward a little bit so that they line up, and again roughly by eye with the edge of there. That's absolutely fine. So great, so that's all the parts of our spider bearing complete now. And what we can do, we'll take these cylinders and we're going to drop them, and I'm going to do this like this, just drop them under the center spline. In fact, I'll put them above it and then put the center spline up there, and then just remove cylinder copies from here. Okay, great, so that's all done. That's all ready to go. And what we can do next is get another null. I'm going to drop the null into the extrude, go into coordinates and zero it out so that it's in the correct place. Drop it above, drop the extrude in and call this spider bearing. And now we're ready to go. That's great. So it's in exactly the right place. And we know that we're ready to position the spider bearing where it needs to go, which is obviously here. So that's why we've got the target null. Okay, so that's fantastic. Moving on from here then, the next port of call for us is a little bit of Expresso. So I'll select my crank because that's where I'm going to put the Expresso tag on this occasion. It doesn't really matter. We could have a separate null, but we'll put it on the crank. Come down to programming tags, Expresso. The window's far too big at the moment, so let's just make it smaller. And all we're going to put in here initially, we're just going to grab hold of the target and we're going to grab hold of the spider bearing. And what we're going to do is simply say coordinates, global position, and here coordinates, global position. So we're going to pass the target's global position to the global position of the spider bearing, connect them up, and as soon as we do, the spider bearing jumps to where it needs to be, or almost. It's not absolutely where it needs to be, is it? So let's just check to see what's going on there. Now, the spider bearing, that means actually that the target is possibly off. Let's have a look. Let's just go into our view here and see where we are. Should actually, oh, that's curious. Can't quite understand why that is. It must mean that my extrusion is slightly off. So I'm going to tell you what I'll do. I'll do this. Go back to view one. Let's just undo that again. Just put everything back where it was. So let's see where that spider bearing actually is and see where my extrude is. My extrude's there and my spider bearing's there. So just move it out of the way. Move it up. Let's just have a quick look in. Yeah, okay, so my spider bearing is not quite right, is it? So why is that? Why is my extrude not in the centre of my spline? That's very interesting. I don't quite know why that is. Let's just select that. So my spline, my spline is not centred correctly. All right, well, that's no problem, is it? So let's just sort this out. So if we come up into spline, or rather tools, I beg your pardon, axis centre, and execute that. That's perfect. That's put my centre or centered my axes within my spline. And now all I need to do is sort things out from there. So let's just take this out of here and this out of here. Let's have a look. So everything else appears to be okay. So the cylinders we need to remove from here as well. Just put those down there. And the extrude, we just simply need to drop into there and then zero that out. So that's corrected that. And then we can also drop the spider bearing into there and do the same thing. Just zero that out. So they're all matching up now. Okay, great. So we can drop our center into our extrude, drop our extrude into the spider bearing, and drop these back under our center. And now we should have things where they should be, I hope. Let's have a look, see where we are. Yeah, we look as if we do. So let's switch back to our 3D view. Yeah, I mean, it looks as if it's all set up as it should be. It looks as if it is. Yeah, it looks as if it is to me. That looks right. Okay, great. So let's just try this again then. If we select the crank, programming tags, Expresso, bring this back in, and in the Expresso, what we can do, once again, bring in the target, bring in the spider bearing, coordinates, global position, connect them up, and we're there. And now we've got it right. So a little bit of an error there, but you saw how I corrected it, and it was pretty simple to correct. Okay, so now if we get a hold of our crank and we rotate it, we should get what we want, and we do. We get the spider bearing rotating in the way that it needs to. It just simply follows position, it doesn't rotate, and that's exactly what we needed to do. So that is all working perfectly. Once again, what I'll do with the guide, I'll just throw it away because I know I've kept it in the originals. I've got it in there. So I'll just throw it away because we don't need it anymore. So that's all great, and it completes our crank and spider bearing. The next port of call for us is to start thinking about making a crank arm. I'm going to switch to my front view. So F4 to switch to my front view. And we can see that the spider bearing is a little off-centered, or rather the cylinders are a little off-centered. So what I'm going to do is select the spider bearing here, and in the rotation B, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change it by 12.85 degrees because I know that that will center this cylinder up along the y-axis. So we'll do that for a start. We don't need to worry about this axis being off. It's not going to cause a problem because the spider bearing only takes the position from the target. It doesn't care about the rotation. So that's fine. It's not going to cause any problems. Moving on from here, we can grab a hold of a cube and we can start thinking about resizing this cube. Now, what I want to do is just group it into, I think it's cylinder number 1, I'm correct in saying. Let's just select cylinder 1. Yes, it is cylinder 1, and we can then zero it out. Switch back to our 3D view, so F1, and then we can think about moving on from here and reshaping this cube, or resizing it, let's say. So where are we? Let's just see. So if we say 7 in the X and Y and 5 in the Z, that should give us the shape and size that we want. And that looks pretty good to me. That looks fine. So yeah, I think we can live with that, and I think that's going to work out fine for us. So once again, I'll command drag to create a copy, drop it into the original so that we've got it in there, and then we can think about making this one editable and working with it. Switch to the front view again and hit O for object so that we can see things a little more closely. And then what we'll do is select, in fact what I'll do first is select polygon mode. Just go to live selection. We can click off visible only, click on our front polygon, and that will give us the front and rear faces selected, which is what we want. And then we can hit I for inset and just hit apply to see what we get. Now 5 is far too much. Let's try 1. That doesn't look as if it's enough, so let's go a little bit further with that. We'll just come in a little bit further. We can do this again by, I think 1.5 should be about right. Let's just have a quick look at that and see if it is. I mean, if it isn't, we can still work on this after the event, but that's looking pretty good, isn't it? It's just touching the edges of the cylinder there, and that should be okay. What I'll next do is change my display to lines and then hit MB for bridge and bridge across there. So that we've cut the middle out, we can just change back to Garage Shade lines and we can see the middle has disappeared. Okay, so that's all good. That's bridged across there and cut the middle section out of our cube. We can then hold down our Option key and select a subdivision surface and drop it into there. Now that looks pretty darn good to me. That's looking quite nice. So let's select our cube, select Edge Mode. And as per usual, select the options menu and then come down to this isosceles editing and switch it off. I really don't want it. UL for loop selection. Get a hold of both of these. So we've got those selected. I can hit my full stop key and hold it down and then come and just drag to make this into a more rounded shape. And that looks good. That looks as if that's going to work pretty well. What we could do, we'll just select UL again and we'll select the inner rings here of these. So we'll select that one and we'll select this one at the back, and then we can just scale them out slightly so that they're not touching the edge there. Just, you know, you don't have to go too crazy with this, just enough so that they're, you know, there's a little bit of clearance. That's all you really need. That looks fine. That'll work great for us. So that's our first. We don't want that really. That's our first. I'll just hit F1 to bring us back to 3D view. That's our first cube set up for our piston, or our crank arm, I should say. So that's fine. And then we need another one of these, and we've got to do some work with that. Before I do continue with that though, there's one thing I want to just check. Yeah, I didn't really want to scale that along the Z-axis. If I just come into here and just bring this back in by eye to about there, that should be fine. We don't need this to scale that in the Z. Okay, looking good. We can move on from here. My subdivision surface is in the correct place within my cube. It's occupying the same point in space, which is what I need. The next thing I need to do is bring in a null, and I need to drop that into the correct place. At the moment it's clearly not in the correct spot, so we need to drop this into the cube, come into coordinates and zero it out. That's fine, and then we can drop this out of here, call it A0 for arm 0, and we'll drop that into it. We can then select our cube and think about doing some more work here. Now what we'll do is actually get us, I said I would get a second cube, and I will do that. I'm going to grab one of those here. Again, I'm going to drop it into my cube and zero it out. And then make it much smaller in its size. So we'll make this one, I think 5.5 by 5.5 by 5. And then we should be able to just move this up. It's already in the subdivision surface, so I'm going to switch that off for a second, and we can see that it's slightly smaller than the first cube. And that's good. That's what I want. I'm going to move this one up, and I'll place it just sort of, well, I can place it wherever I like, to be quite honest with you, because it doesn't really matter where it goes initially. If we don't like the positioning of it, when we've sorted all of this out and created our arm, we can still grab the necessary vertices here, the necessary edges, and we can still move this around and change the size. So I'm not too worried about where this is going to go. I'm going to leave it somewhere there for now. Remove this from here for now, and then again we can command drag to copy it and drop a copy into the originals so that we've got it in there in case anything goes wrong. Select it, make it editable, and it's going to be a repeat process for what we did before. We're going to get a hold of our live selection tool, and we'll click off visible only, select our front face when we're in polygon mode, and that will select our front and rear faces. And then we can, and then once again we can hit I for inset, and we're saying 1.5. We can drop that in there, and again we know that we can adjust this after the event, so there's no problem if we need to do so. We can come into lines, MB for bridge, and once again bridge through here, and that's done what we need to do. So once again we'll switch our display back to garage shade lines. We can zoom out a little bit so that we can see the top and the bottom of our crank arm, and then we can drop our cube under the subdivision surface and we can switch it back on. Now at the moment we're only getting a single cube affected by the subdivision surface, but what we're going to do next is select both of these, and we're going to say connect objects and delete, and now both of them are affected by the subdivision surface because of course they're now one object. As we did before, we'll get a little bit closer here select edge mode, UL for loop selection, and do the same as we did before. And then hold down the full stop key, click and drag, and we've got that back to where we need it. And that's looking really nice. Now, in order to make this into a crank arm, what we need to do is select, firstly, polygon mode. We need to select our live selection tool, check visible only, select this face, select this face, hit I for inset. We'll come about, let's say, 1 centimetre and see if this is okay for us. I don't think it's going to be too bad. And then MB for bridge, and bridge between these two faces here. And that has pretty much created a piston arm, or a crank arm I should say. Now, it isn't quite right in the way that it's set up. We can see that there's a few issues with it, but that's easy enough for us to sort out. If we go into our edge mode and we say UB for a ring selection, we can then hold down our full stop key and just drag to relax those vertices there. And that now looks very much like a crank arm. So that's looking very, very nice. Fantastic. So that's another little piece of it done. Before we concern ourselves with the piston head, I'm just going to select UL, select the bottom here, also select this top ring here, and then hold down my full stop key and do this just to tighten those vertices to there, and that looks quite good. It might be that I don't quite want to do that. What I can do is just loosen this a little bit. KL for a knife cut there, it's a loop cut. If we just do this probably there, and we do this one just here, that's quite nice. And then once again I can do UL, and we can hold down the full stop key and just relax those a little bit more, and it just gives it that sort of subtlety down at the bottom and at the top, which I really like. It's a nice effect, that is. That looks really nice now. So yeah, that just about finishes that particular part of the model off, and I'm liking what I'm seeing there. That looks really nice. Yeah, actually that does. It looks as if it's something that might have been cast, which is what I wanted to look like. Great. So that'll do nicely. Now, I did say, didn't I, that if we wish to, we could grab a hold, if we just go for rectangular selection, we could grab a hold of this and we could still move it after the event, which of course we still can. So if you don't like the length of the piston arm, or you want it a bit shorter, a bit longer, you can still do that. That's fine. I'm actually quite happy with the length of that. I think it looks okay. So I'm going to leave it as it is, and just click off there. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. And the next thing we can think about then is working on the piston head. The first thing I'm going to do is select cylinder 1, which is this cylinder here, and command drag to copy it. Now cylinder 6, as it's now called, I'm going to drop into cylinder 1, and I'm going to make its radius 1.4 centimeters, its height 12, and rotation segments and height segments I'm going to leave as they are. So that's fine, that's good. So we can see it here and it's in the right place. The next thing I'm going to do is switch to world axis mode and move this up so that it's in the correct position. I'll just change to my front view and we'll eyeball this into position. Get a little bit closer so we can see exactly what we're doing, and we can just bring this up until it's around the middle, which is about there. I think I may be wrong. Difficult to say. I'll tell you what, let's have a look. Yeah, okay, it's not perfect. Somewhere around there I think we'll be okay. That'll do for us, I think. It doesn't have to be absolutely spot on. I mean, generally this link will be hidden by the piston anyway, or piston head anyway, so it won't be seen in general. Now, if we can just move this, and again I'll just hit F3 to go into my right hand view, hit O for object, and we'll just eyeball this into the middle there. That should do nicely for that. That should be okay. Now it's a little bit off on this hole. Now what we need to do there is what we did before. I'm just going to move this out of here, and I can switch back to our objects coordinate system. And what I'll also do in the coordinates, I can just take that back to 0. That's fine. With the arm, I'll select the cube and we'll go into edge mode, which we are already in. Actually, we've got edge mode selected, and UL, select the inner edge on both the front and back faces, and once again we can select our scale tool. We don't need to scale in the Z, so we'll lock that, and we'll see what we can do here. Just bring that to somewhere there. I think will be probably okay for that. There's, as long as there's that touch of clearance, just a small amount of clearance, that's fine. So that's all good, and it's set up as it needs to be. We can now think about creating our piston head. To do this, I'll bring in a cylinder. I'm going to drop it into cylinder 6 and 0 it out. And now we can think about setting its dimensions correctly. Its radius needs to be 6.5. It wants to be 15 in the height, 6 height segments, and 8 rotation segments. We'll just zoom out a little bit so that we can see it. Now at the moment, well, I'm just going to remove it from there actually. At the moment, its orientation around the y-axis needs to be changed, so we need to change it to 22.5 degrees. We can just see this gudgeon pin here, which is cylinder 6, showing through it. And if we change our display to wireframe, we can now see our height segments, and we can see that the gudgeon pin is lining up nicely there. Now we can just move this roughly into position somewhere around there. And the next thing we need to do is make a copy of it. So we'll command drag, place it in the originals. That's in there. And then we can continue from here. Reselect the cylinder and I'll hit C to make it editable. We're already in edge mode, which is great. That's where we need to be. And we can hit UL and start manipulating some of these edges into position, or at least roughly into position. So we'll move this one up here. Hit spacebar to go back to our loop selection, space again to go back to our selection tool. Keep on doing this until we've got things sorted out. Now this doesn't have to be done with absolute precision, because these loops here, or loops of polygons here and here, we're going to be manipulating and extruding inwards to allow for our piston rings. Now our piston rings are obviously going to be tubes, and we're going to do some work with those, so they're going to give us this height. So it doesn't matter if these are not correct at the moment, we can easily change them after the event when we've got our piston rings in place. The next thing to do, we'll just hit the space bar again and again just to bring these in. And what I'll do is go to my front view, just zoom out a little bit, and then by eye all I'm going to do is manipulate these into where I think they need to go, which is about somewhere about there. It's lining up with this here at the bottom, and if we follow that round, it's about where it needs to be. So that looks okay. That should give us what we want. Because we need, well, in fact, what I'll do, just to make sure, if we just drop this down a little bit to somewhere here, so that it's just touching that. Let's have a look, see where we are. Yeah, could it actually go lower? I reckon it can go somewhere, say there. And then what we'll do is go into object mode and just move the whole cylinder, or the whole piston head I should say, just move it up to there, and that looks about right to me. That's good. I think that's good. It's certainly not too bad. It's one of those things though, you've just got to be a bit careful here, because ideally we need this to be almost, well, pretty perfectly square or thereabouts. So we've got to be a little bit careful how we do this. And I think we just need to come down a little bit there, because I'm looking at this dimension here, this here. We've got to get something similar to that here. As I say, we don't have to be absolutely pedantic about it, because the piston is actually going to be hiding what's going on inside it. As long as this lines up pretty accurately on the outside, we don't have to worry too much, but it's worth taking the time just to get things right. So let's just go back into our edge mode, and we'll move this one up to a similar sort of position somewhere about there. I think will do. That'll give us what we want, I think. So go back to 3D view and we'll see what we've got so far. So we can see that we're well and truly on the way to creating our piston here, our piston head. The next thing I'm going to do is select, well, I'm going to say UL again, and I'm just going to change to polygon mode and select this bottom ring, not that one, this bottom ring here. That's what I need to do. Hit I for extrude inner, or inset I should say. It used to be extrude inner, didn't it? It's inset now. And then I will say minus 0.75. I'm going to go 0.75. Oops, not minus 0.75. I need to go 0.75. That's better. So 0.75, and then D for extrude, and this will be a minus value. This will be minus 14.5. So we've got a hollow cylinder now, and that's exactly what we need. Fabulous. So moving on from here then, we can worry about these loops here where we're going to put our piston rings. So we'll hold down shift and select both of those. Again, we'll say D for extrude, and this will be minus 0.5, and that's fine. That's all looking good. So the thing's going to actually work fine like that. It's going to be great. The next thing to do is just get our selection tool here, make sure visible only is checked, and check this one, or click on this one I should say. I'm going to get a bit closer and select this one, and then all I'm going to do is by eye again, just move them up somewhere around here so that we've got the piston shape. In actual fact, before I do that, there's something I'm going to do first. I'm just going to undo that. We will do that in a moment, but we'll come back into edge mode first, and I'm going to say KL for knife loop cut. And then on this inside edge, because we've got no height segments on the inside at the moment, and we do need one, I'm just going to click here so that we've got a cut through the middle, and then hit UL again for loop selection and select the cut that we've just made, and then go into our front view, and we can see the cut we just made there, and this is what we need to level it up with. So we'll move this up until it matches up with this, somewhere around there. That's okay by eye. That's looking good. And then we can see that we've got two lines on the inside here. Now we've got on this outside edge of our piston, we've got this, as we said, we wanted it to be a square, so this polygon ideally is a square. On the inside it's a rectangle, because obviously it's going to be a little bit smaller. So we've got to do some work there, and we've got to manipulate that into the correct shape. So we've got to make this come out to here somewhere, so that the two are matching up with each other. So that's the next port of call for us. So we'll select this edge, and in fact what I'll do, I think it might be easier, I'm just thinking about this, it might be easier to just do this in polygon mode. If I go into polygon mode and just select this in a polygon, and I also select this in a polygon, In fact, I may have to do them one at a time because the axis is off and I don't think we can level that up. Don't think if we play around in here we can actually do anything with that. I don't know whether we can just use object mode. No, it doesn't make any difference. It's very strange that it doesn't make any difference. So let's do it one at a time. So we'll select this one, go into our front view, and now all we've got to do is just select our scale tool, and by eye we just need to manipulate that to the correct shape, which is somewhere around there. So that's fine, and then we can select this one and we'll do the same thing. So front view and bring that to somewhere there. That should be fine. As I say, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's sort of eyeballed and it looks okay, it's fine. And it doesn't matter about this here. We're not too worried about that. That's not going to cause us any major heartaches. It's okay. That's going to be fine. Great. So now let's select this and this and move them up to somewhere there to give us the shape that we want for our cylinder head or our piston head. Looking nice. So we've got the basic shape there. The next thing to do is go into our front view again, and this time with our selection tool we'll click off visible only, select these, and we should have now all of the inner and outer edges selected that we need, or the inner and outer polygons that we need selected. Eye for inset, and probably about 1 centimetre is not going to be too far off. Probably, I think we can probably go a little bit more. So if we say 1.05, that should be okay. I'll switch my display to lines, hit MB for bridge, and make sure I'm in the correct mode, which I am, and then I can bridge between these two and bridge between these two. Let's just go back into GarageBand's lines and make sure that we've got what we want. And yeah, we've got it. We've done it. We've created the shape that we need. So moving on from here, the next stage is to hold down the Option key and select Subdivision Surface. Straight away you can see that we're well and truly on the road to getting this correct. It's already looking really nice. To get it into the correct shape, we need to select our edge mode, select our cylinder, and then we can start working with the edges once again. So UL for loop selection, and we can say we want a number. There'll be a number of loops that we've got to select because we want the inner ones here as well. And then we can select this bottom inner loop, this loop, this loop, top inner loop, bottom inner loop, and this loop. And then we can come to the bottom of the thing here and we can select these. So we want, if we can get it, that one, and we want the inner. Let's just make sure we can get that. Let's just see if we can get it this way. There we go, that inner. They're the two that we want there. We'll also select both the inner and outer loops around our gudgeon pin, and they're all selected, and then all we need to do is hold down the full stop key, click and drag, and straight away we've created something that looks truly beautiful. Fantastic. So we've got our piston head set up and it's looking really, really nice. Now there is a little bit of a bulge here. I wouldn't worry too much about that because we're not putting it inside our chamber that the cylinder would actually be in. We're not worried too much about that, so it's not a major issue. And even if you were doing that, it would be going up and down inside something and you wouldn't even see it anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's not a major issue that you need to be concerned with. But that all looks really nice. Let's just go back to Isopalms. Yeah, and we've got something that's looking really, really beautiful. Okay, so that's our piston head complete. The next thing to do is create the piston rings, just to finish this off. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to make these from tubes, so we'll bring a tube in. I'll drop it into the cylinder and we'll start to work on this. I'm going to do the coordinates first. We'll just zero those out so that it's in more or less the correct place. Go back into our object tab and say 5.9 for the outer radius, an inner radius of 5, rotation segment 60. I'll leave my cap segments at 1, my height 0.9, and my height segments 1. And we'll move this, we'll just move it somewhere into place or somewhere near there. We don't want it actually being affected by the subdivision surface, so we'll put it there. Now if we select the tube again, we can see that it's here and we can see that its size is fine. We'll then go into our slice, place this on. We've got it at 180 at the moment. We actually want it at 350. So we're just going to take 10 degrees out of it. And then in our coordinates, we can just move this round until we see the cutout, which we see there. So that's fine. That's our first ring. And you can see what I said earlier about moving the edges on here. So if I just say UL, I need to move the edges here. Let's just zoom in a little bit closer so that we can see where we are. Yeah. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to select these two here, and if we just bring those down to somewhere close to where the actual piston ring is, we can then do the same here. Select this inner ring and this one, and back to our selection tool by hitting the space and just move that one up a little bit. That's fine. So that's our first piston ring in place and it's looking really good. We'll get a hold of our tube, command drag to copy, and drop our second ring down into place, which we'll place here. Just a little bit of play in there, and then all we've got to do is select the cylinder, UL, select both of these by holding the shift key down, hit the space bar, and then move this one up to about somewhere here. And again, all by eye, don't worry about being too particular about it. And there you go, it's all sorted out and it all looks great. And of course, with this tube here, we can just move this one slightly off so that they're not both in the same place. And that looks great, all fantastic and all done. So that's our piston head complete. And we can add a null. We'll hold down the option key, add a null, and call this head. And that's ready to rock and roll. Okay, fantastic. So we've got our parts all complete. We've got everything that we need to make this work now. And we can move on from here. And we've got to obviously create 7 of these assemblies. And we'll do that next. One thing I do need to do before we continue is just remove everything from the head, select it, and then its rotation H just needs to be zeroed out. And then I can place everything back in there. Cylinder 6 we also need to place in the head, and that's everything in there that we need. And we can then think about creating 7 piston heads. Now, in order to do this, the first thing we need to do is create another null. And that null is now in the correct position, Y and well, X and Y. The Z is the only thing that's wrong. So what I'll do is group it into the head and then zero out its position Z. And now it's in the correct place. And we can remove this from here, group the head into the null, and we're ready to go. So what we need to do is hold down the option key and get a cloner. Now the cloner at the moment isn't set up correctly, so we'll select our object tab and set it to radial. It will be XY 7 clones and the radius will be 0. And now our piston heads are set up the way they need to be, well, at least for now. So that's great. What we can now do then is select the cloner and just hit C to make it editable, and everything is in there. We've got everything perfectly set up. So we can just close these up, That's great. And now our nulls we can think about renaming, and I'm just going to call these, well, P for piston, 0, P1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and oops, P5, P5 and P6. And that gets those all ready for the next step. Fantastic. So we'll close that one up. The next step then for us, we're going to duplicate the arms. So we're going to clone the arms. We're going to do exactly the same thing again. So what I'll do first though is remove all of these from this cloner because we don't need that anymore. We'll just remove that one. And I'll close up the originals. Close up the crank for now. Close up the spider bearing, and then I'll drop these beneath it. They can go there. So they're ready to go. So with our arm here, what we'll do, I'll bring in the cloner first because I need to move it. I need to actually group that cloner. So let's see where we're going to group it. What I'm going to do is group it into cylinder 1, which is this cylinder at the center of the spider bearing, because that's the point of origin that these need to be rotating around when they're cloned. So let's grab a hold of the cloner and drop it in there. In the coordinates, we'll zero out the y-axis. So it's in the correct position in the x and y. It's just the z that we need to work with. So I'll switch to my right view. That'll be the one that's correct for this. I'll hit H and then move this until it's just about in the center. I'm just going to zoom in. It just needs to be in the center of the crank arm really, but we can work this out by this piston head here. If we put it just about there, that should be perfect. Just zoom out, and yeah, we can see that that's running through the center of that crank arm. That's all sorted out and ready to go. We can remove the cloner and put it back up the top, close the crank up and drop our arm into there. I'll just close that up for now. Once again, the cloner needs to be set up correctly, so we'll hit the object tab and we'll select radial. 7 clones, we want it in X and Y, and we just need to manipulate this. It won't be 0 this time. We'll just need to bring it in until we get it in the right place, which is about there. That's fine. So 15, that's absolutely perfect for us. Great, that looks superb. Once again, we can make the cloner editable, and we've got all of our arms duplicated. We can remove these from the cloner and remove the cloner from our scene because we don't need it anymore. Okay, that's great. So we can think about doing the next step. Our next port of call actually is to start grouping these into our piston nulls. So we'll put A0 inside P0 and we'll call this arm 0 so that we've got a clearer idea of what we're doing. And the same here, we'll just put head 0. And I'm going to repeat this all the way through. So by the power of editing, I will come back to you when I've grouped everything and renamed everything. And arm 6 and head 6 completes all of the grouping. So everything is now where it should be. They're all well and truly grouped. Arm 0, head 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is the important grouping. So you've got to have these piston nulls, which are, if we just switch to our front view and hit H. So the piston nulls, they're all grouped into this center position here. They're all set at this center position. The arms are obviously offset because they're around the spider bearing, and the heads, again, they're facing this center position. So that's the important grouping. Okay, that's how you must group all of this in order for it to work correctly. So that's great, all done, all ready to go, and we can move on from here. Our first port of call here is to check our arms, because if we just select one of them, we can see that this is pointing along its y-axis. This is not right, it needs to be pointing along its z-axis, because we're going to be using target expressions, of course, target tags, and they're going to make the arms point at the piston heads. So this is what we've got to sort out. All of them are the same, they're all pointing along their y-axis. So what we'll do is close this head up here, select all of our arms, so Command select all of these, and that's all of them, and then select the rotate tool, and per object transform is checked, which is great, that's what we need it to be, and we need to turn them through 90 degrees around this particular axis. So let's get a hold of them, start moving them, hold down shift so that we do it in 5-degree increments until we get to 90 degrees, and that's there. Fantastic. So now if I select arm 0, we can see that it's now pointing along its z-axis towards the piston head, and that's exactly what it needs to be doing. Moving on from here then, we just need to do a check in our spider bearing to ascertain as to where these cylinders are matching up with the arm. So arm 0 is clearly here. So let's see where this cylinder is. Now we've got a problem then, because this cylinder is not matching up with this here. So which cylinder does? Well, cylinder 1. So we need to put that at the top, because then that will match up with arm 0. The next cylinder, yeah, that will be that one. So cylinder 0. Then this cylinder does match up with this arm. Cylinder 2 is over here. So what have we got next? So we've got arm 3. Well, that needs to match up with this. So that isn't going to work, is it? So I'm thinking it's going to be cylinder 5 that we need to put after this cylinder. Cylinder 4 will need to be here. Cylinder 3, and then cylinder 2 should now match up with arm 6, and it does. So now our cylinders are in the correct order. It doesn't matter that they're not in numerical order. If you wish to, you can always rename them so that they are. But anyway, that's the order that we need them to be in for this to work. Moving on from here then, we can start thinking about Expresso again. Let's open up the expression. And we left it so that we just had a couple of nodes in there. And that's all we've done so far. Let's just move these up. The first node that we're going to need to bring in will be an iteration. So we'll come down to iterator and grab a hold of one of those, and we can leave it just about there. The start can be 0, the end 6. So that's all set up and ready to go. The next thing we'll need will be 2 linked lists. So we'll grab a hold of one of those and then command drag to create a second. And we can plumb the iterations output port into the index ports of both linked lists. Moving on from here, then we need to populate these. So the first linked list here will need to contain the arms. So we'll select the eyedropper and select the arms. And that's all of those. And in our second linked list, we need the cylinders that we've just reordered. So we'll bring those in the order that they're in within there. And that's those 2 sorted out. We can bring in a cylinder from here, so we'll just grab a hold of cylinder 1 and bring that in. And at the input stage, we'll give it an object port. At the output stage, a coordinates global position. So that's that taken care of. We can also drag in arm 0. Once again, we'll connect the linked list to an object port, move this over here, and we'll also give it a global position port. And then we can simply connect these 2. And now everything should be okay. So if we select our crank, hit F1 to go back into our 3D view, select the rotate tool. We should be able to rotate if I deselect axis mode. And there we go. We can see that that's working. It's doing what it needs to do. So that's fine. That's all good. The only thing I might do is select all of these cylinders and just move them very, very slightly along their Z-axis, just a tiny, tiny bit. Let's just see what we've got. Yeah, and that just gives us a little bit of a gap there, and that's good. I like that. I like the idea of that. That's nice. That's fine. That works good. Okay, so we've got it that far, and that's all looking very nice. So that completes this Expresso expression. We don't need to put any more nodes into this one. What we do need to do is select the crank and give this a second Expresso expression, and we'll put it after the initial one because the initial one's there, and that's our second one. And then we can move on from here and get the final Expresso sorted out. We've also got to think about putting some target tags on the arms as well. So we've got that to work out. In fact, we'll probably do the target expressions first. I think that'll be the easiest thing to do actually. So I'll just close this down and we'll move on from here. Another thing that we quickly need to sort out as well, if we just switch to our right-hand view, we can see that the piston heads are now no longer aligned with the arms. This is very easy to sort out. All we need to do is select one arm, and we can see that the position Z here is 1.8705. Now, if we copy that, we can then select all of our heads because they're still zeroed. So we'll select every head. So Command select all of these. And then we can paste the figure into there and hit return, and then now all aligned again. So that's perfectly good. Everything is set up the way it needs to be. Our next port of call then is to get the target expressions in, the target tags. We're going to actually put those on these subdivision surfaces within the arms. Now at the moment we've got the same issue that we had before, because our arms subdivision surfaces are all pointing along their y-axes. So we need to open up the arms, select all of those, and then change them accordingly. So let's do that now. Right, that's all the subdivision surfaces out. Let's just do this. Select the rotate tool. We're in per object transformation. Once again, I'll hold, oops, don't want to do that. Let's just go into the axis mode and we'll hold down shift as we turn and rotate those through 90 degrees. And that's great. So we can click off there and we're all okay, I think now. Yeah, great. So we're all set up and ready. So we'll select them all again and give them target tags. And then we can start thinking about what we're going to do with these. So obviously our arms, we can just close. Oh, we don't need to close that up actually. We just need to select the appropriate target tag and then place head 0 in the first one, 1 in the second, 2, 3, and we can see that they're snapping into position. 4, 5, and finally head 6. And now they're all pointing in the correct directions, and if we get a hold of the crank and turn it, we can see that they're starting to behave as we'd expect them to. Right, that's the next step complete then, which is all looking good. And now we can think about moving on to the next part of the Expresso. Just close the arm back up and we'll get the editor open. Okay, the first thing we need to bring into here will be once again an iterator. So we'll bring the iteration in there and we'll set its end at 6 as we did before. And once again we need 2 linked lists. We'll bring one in and command drag to create the second. Plumb the output of the iteration into the index inputs of our link lists, and they're ready to go. Our top list here we need to populate with the arms, so we'll bring those in. And that completes that one. And for this one we need the heads, so we'll populate that accordingly. Okay, great. So we've got those two all sorted out, and we can think about what we're going to do next. First thing is to bring in the crank. And because of the way we're orientated, we need to give this a position X port. Just make that a little bigger. We can then bring in any of the arms, so we'll bring in arm 0, connect the link list to an object port there, and we need to give this at the output stage position X and also position Y ports. And that gets that set up for us. We can now bring in a math node. So calculate math. This needs to be a subtract in the function, so we'll set that up. And then all we need to do is subtract the two x's from each other. So we've got those two subtracted there. Actually, I've just realised I've made a mistake. That should actually be plumbed from that one, because these are the heads and these are the arms, and it's the arms we're interested in. So just move that up to there and that up to there. Okay, great. So we're on the right road now. Moving on from here, we've got to find a constant value, because what we need is the distance between this and this. So these two cylinders, we need to find that length, which is going to be our constant value. So how do we do that? I mean, I haven't worked this out previously. Well, let's just see where we are. So it's going to be cylinder 1, and we're going to do this by using a distance node. So cylinder 1, and what have we got here? So in the arm, let's have a quick look, see what we've got. It's not actually in the arm, is it? It's not where we need to go. It's going to be, I think, let's have a look, or is it? No, it's the head, isn't it? That's right. So that's it, cylinder 6. So if I just bring that in there, and I give both of these global position ports, that sets those up, and then all I need to do is bring in a distance node. So calculate distance, plumb these two into here, and then get a result node, connect this up, and there we go. So the length, our constant, and we'll bring in a constant node. Constant, what we can say as our value will be 43.756. No, beg your pardon, 576. 576. So that's fine. That's got that sorted out. So yeah, if you ever get a problem here and you don't know this length, all you've got to do, get both cylinders and find the distance between them, and that gives you your constant length. Great, so that's all that sorted out. We can bring this in somewhere here, and we're ready to do the next step. We need two float functions, so we'll come down to calculate float function, bring this over here, select it and copy, and then with both of them selected we can give these power of 2 functions there, which is what we need to do. So we need to raise this to the power of 2, and we need to raise this to the power of 2. We need to Command drag to create a second subtract node, plumb the two in accordingly, and then I'll Command drag to copy one of them and then change the function to square root. And that completes that mathematical calculation. Moving on from here, I'm going to pull this linked list just in here. And we then need another math node, which we can plumb the output of this square root into the input 1. We can change the function to add, and then we simply need to bring in a head, so we'll bring in head 0, and we'll give this a position Y port, and we'll also give it an object port. If I plumb my linked list into the object port, that's the next step, and then this position Y here, this just needs to be plumbed into the input 2 of the add, and then the final step is to connect this to here. So this is the moment of truth then. Let's see what happens. So we'll connect them, and instantly our piston heads are now in exactly the right position. And if we turn our crank, we find that we've got the motion that we need. Let's just hit H so that we can see everything. And there you go. It all works exactly as it needs to. So that's fantastic. We've got it all good, and that's exactly as it needs to be. Now, with mine, I actually added a propeller. I'm not going to do that here because I don't think there's much point going into it, but all I did was create, I mean, if I go back to my original here, we've got the propeller in there, you can see it here. All I've done there, the nose, the actual cone was a cone. It started out as a cone, and I just set it up, and basically I cut a piece out of it on each side, and then all I did was extrude, selecting the faces, I just extruded and put caps on the extrusion so that it created a thickness there, and then dropped it into a subdivision surface to smooth it out. That's all I did there. And the propeller itself, that started life as it was another cylinder. I think I had 6 or 8 rotation segments on it, probably 6. Selected 2 of the polygons, which were obviously opposite each other, and then used the matrix extrude to create the shape, and then drop that into a subdivision surface. And that was how I did it. Simple as that, really. So nothing particularly clever going on there. You can ignore these things here. They were just an experiment, nothing more. But that was what I did there. So let's just go back to ours here. But yeah, I mean, for the sake of it, I'm not going to bother putting the propeller in. You can do that if you wish to. But yeah, that's how you go about setting up a radial piston assembly. It's been a bit of a marathon, this tutorial, but I think there are a lot of techniques in it that were worth showing you. So I think it was just worth taking the time, and hopefully you felt the same. But fair enough if you didn't, and you're already gone and not listening to what I'm saying now. But yeah, that's how you go about doing it. So as always, I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you've got a lot out of it, and there's some techniques here that you can use within your own projects. And if you have enjoyed it, then please give the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, then please subscribe to the channel, and of course leave a comment and ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, then please share this video, because all this good stuff helps keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that brings the curtain down on this one, so I'll see you very soon on the next tutorial.